Hello, it's Andrew Doubleday here yet again. Today we're looking at the text, the Gospel lectionary reading for Sunday the 13th of June. It's Mark chapter 4 verses 26 through to 34. It concerns two little parables. They follow on from a much better known parable which is only a few verses earlier in the same chapter. And we're referring to the parable of the sower. So I'm going to describe that first before we move into the text for today. You remember the story. It's more fully articulated in others of the Gospels. It's of a sower who sows seed. And some of the seed falls on the hardness of the path. And it's snatched away by birds, and Jesus gives us as a picture of Satan snatching away the word that is sown so that there is nothing to show for it. Some seed falls on rocky places where the soil is shallow. The seeds fall in, they spring up quickly with great joy and enthusiasm, and yet because the soil is shallow, they have not been able to develop an extensive root system so that when the sun gets too hot, they've got nothing to draw on and they fade and die. Some seed falls among thorns, where ultimately it's choked out. And as Jesus describes it, it's the worries, it's the busyness, it's the cares of this life that get in the way of our relating to God, and in the end, there's nothing left because it just gets choked off. And some fall in the good soil and reproduce 30-fold, 60-fold, even 100-fold. Now, there's a tendency to personalize this. It's all about me, maybe all about you. What kind of soil am I, or what kind of soil was the seed that it is me has been planted in? Am I the seed that has fallen through a crack in the concrete? Because sometimes it feels a bit like that, and I'm just struggling to survive. Am I the seed that has fallen in the rocky ground, where there's a little bit of soil, but I know when the pressure comes on, I tend to wilt? Am I the seed that is fallen into the earth among thorns, struggling, competing for a bit of daylight, and kind of feeling that it's just too hard, there's just too much that's going on? Or am I the seed that is fallen in the good soil, reproducing 30, 60, 100-fold? And I have to say that I don't see a lot of evidence for that. It is what it is. It's perfectly natural for us to ask the question, what kind of soil am I? Where has my seed fallen? And so the following two parables actually will allow us to, I'd suggest, interpret that parable differently. So let's pick it up now. Mark chapter 4 verses 26 through to 34. Jesus also said, "The kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground, and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. The earth produces of itself first the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle, because the harvest has come." He also said, "With what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable will we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, which when sown on the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs, and puts forth large branches so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." With many such parables he spoke the words to them, as they were able to hear it. He did not speak to them except in parables, but he explained everything in private to his disciples. Now, we're not going to spend time today looking at those last couple of verses, because that would take up the whole of the time that we have. So we have these two parables, these two little parables. And the first one he prefaces it. He says the kingdom of God is as if someone scattered seed. And then the sower sleeps and goes about daily life, almost as if forgetting about the seed that has been planted. Yet the seed grows. The point? Well, in verse 28 we read, the earth produces of itself, or as the NIV says, all by itself the soil produces grain. All by itself. What a great principle. Human activity has nothing to do with it. I want to suggest there's something deeper that's going on here. It's no longer about us. We cannot make things grow. This capacity is built into the very fabric and processes of the things themselves and of their environment. It's miraculous in its own kind of way. This gift of growth and vitality in life. All we can do is to cooperate with it. Or not. I want to suggest that the whole point of this parable is that this is something that God is doing. The kingdom of God, its growth, its abundance, its the mere fact that it grows without us having to do anything, is something that God is doing. It's not all about us. It's not about you. It's not about me. As I've said, it's all about what God is up to. The second parable, also prefaced with, what shall we compare the kingdom of God? What is it like? Then he tells of the smallest seed that grows into a huge garden plant. The birds of the air roost in its branches and they build their nests in its shade. It's a wonderful thing to behold. Such small beginnings, this tiniest of seeds, and yet such expansiveness. Look what it grew into, all from that incy bitsy little speck of a seed. Again, this is not about what we can do or what we do. It's all totally beyond our capacity. Both parables give images of what the kingdom of God is like, and that this is all pointing to the activity of God. It's God who does it. It's, in the first, it's God who causes the growth, quietly working away, unseen in the background or in the underground. It's God's activity, not ours. God does all the hard work, all the heavy lifting, and I think that's the main point of it. In the second, it's God's work that produces such extreme growth from such a small seed, such abundant extravagance. Both these parables focus not on ourselves, but on God. On God's push to make things grow and prosper. On God's push to make things spring forth in extravagant abundance. God is portrayed here not as miserly or mean-spirited or curmudgeonly. God is not holding out on us. The kingdom of God is not a place of begrudging surrendering of good. It's not as if goodness has to be extracted out of God and that God gives it unwillingly. It's not like that at all. It's a place of overflowing, overwhelming, wholehearted generosity. God is the good giver who delights to give, who delights to bless. So when we look back on the previous parable, the parable of the sower, we have a new lens through which to see it. We've passed it, and now we can see it kind of like as we've gone past in the car. We see it in our rear view mirror, and perhaps we can see it differently. We're no longer seeing it as being primarily about us, rather than fretting about what kind of soil we're planted in. And seriously, the seed, if it is us, has no choice about where it's planted. I don't know if you've noticed that. It doesn't get to choose. We can see that God the sower plants in hope, plants in faith, plants in belief and love. knowing that while some seed will fall on the path and some of it will be snatched away, in hope he sows that yet there may be some that will survive, perhaps even thrive. So God sows in hope anyway, knowing that some seed falling in the shallow soil will spring forth initially with great enthusiasm and ultimately will fall away. Yet there may be some that will survive, perhaps even thrive. So God sows in hope anyway, knowing that some seed falling among the thorns will be choked out by the neighbourhood. Yet there may be some that will survive, perhaps even thrive. And God sows in hope anyway. You kind of see the difference in the picture? Rather than seeing these places as a problem, God looks and thinks, I'm going to sow in hope anyway. I'm going to sow. See what springs up, what can happen even there. These parables of the sower all point to God's generosity, to God's desire for abundance, for our wholeness, our well-being, and dare I say it, for our prosperity. God's desire is for all of us to flourish into the fullness of our humanity, to be all that we can be. God sows in hope. God grows us. God's desire for us is to grow into all our magnificence, to walk with Him. God is not curmudgeonly. God is not miserly. God is not holding out on us. And if the parables tell us anything, they tell us that the kingdom of God is a place where we are all in hope, designed to grow to be all we can be, where there are no firsts and there are no lasts, but God is committed to all of us. I hope you found that useful. God bless you. Amen.